I never thought my life would turn into a nightmare, but it did. The moment I walked into that room and saw her with him, everything shattered. My beautiful wife, my Ginny, in the arms of another man. Rage consumed me. I confronted them, the betrayal burning in my chest. That night, under the pouring rain, I sought revenge. In the shadows, I plotted, my heart cold and calculating. It wasn't just an affair, it was a war, and I wasn't going to lose. December 26th. I just settled down with my morning coffee and a tough Sudoku puzzle when my phone rang. I usually do a puzzle before work to wake up my brain, and I've gotten so used to it that I still do it even on days off. You could say solving puzzles is my job. The team I'm on gets tricky computer code from different places, and we have to figure out what it does, where it came from, and how to stop it. I enjoy this kind of work. I like puzzles, and getting paid to solve them is even better. Anyway, my phone showed it was my boss calling. I frowned when I saw that. The last thing I wanted was a call from work during the Christmas break. But when the boss calls, I have to answer. He got straight to the point. No greetings or holiday wishes. He just said, "I need you in the office right now." "Thomas, really?" I complained. "It's the day after Christmas." "It's about national security, Thomas. You need to hurry." I sighed and quickly wrote a note to Ginny, letting her know where I'd be in case she came home and saw the house empty. She had gone to help a friend who was feeling sad after a breakup. I thought it was a lot to ask of her, especially during the holidays, but that's Ginny. She always cares about her friends. That's one of the things I love about her. After I wrote the note and put on my heavy coat, I jumped in my car and drove toward the Baltimore-Washington Parkway. What could be so urgent at this time of year, I wondered. But when my boss talked about national security, I knew I couldn't question it. He wasn't likely to be exaggerating, or at least I didn't think he was. We work for the NSA, the National Security Agency, and we often deal with serious issues. As I drove toward Fort Meade, where the NSA is located, I wondered if my boss's emergency had to do with the puzzle I was working on a few weeks ago. 3 or 4 weeks ago, he had given me a really tough piece of code to figure out. It looked like a worm, a bad kind of virus that messes with computers and makes them do things they shouldn't. But this code didn't respond to anything we tested it on, so we had no idea what it was meant to do if it found its target. I enjoy puzzles like that. I find it exciting to match wits with a hacker who thinks they're smarter than everyone else. They had tricked us so far, but I felt like we were getting closer to solving it. When I got through security and arrived, they told me to go directly to my boss's office, which was unusual. When I walked in, I saw him speaking quietly with his director. This was definitely not a normal situation. My manager looked worried about something. He hesitated for a moment, then glanced at his director and shrugged. Then he turned back to me. He said, "Thomas, I'm going to be straight with you. Your wife is cheating on you." I was shocked. I had no idea why he had called me in. This was the last thing I expected to hear. It felt like a knife in my chest. "No," I shouted and jumped up. "That's a lie! How can you say something so awful?" He leaned back in his chair when I stood up, but once he saw I wasn't going to hurt him, he relaxed a bit and looked to his director for help. The director got up and started pacing behind my manager. "I know this is a shock, but it happens all the time. You need to face it," he said. "No, I don't," I replied angrily. "It's not true. You're wrong. You've made a mistake." The two men exchanged glances, and the director shrugged. "We don't want to get into too many details, but we have to convince you." He gestured to my manager, who started pulling up a file on his computer. The director continued, "This call was recorded on Christmas Eve, but we didn't listen to it until this morning. That's why I called you in." He nodded at my manager, who had the file ready. "Sit down so you can hear this," he warned. My manager clicked a button, and my wife's voice filled the room. The sound quality wasn't great, but I recognized her voice right away. "I hate that we can't be together these next 2 days," she said in a way I hadn't heard in a long time. "What's wrong, baby? Didn't I give you enough love last time?" a man's voice asked. "No, never," she replied. "Being with you makes me want even more. You're like a drug to me." I thought I might be sick. My manager looked worried and offered to turn off the recording, but I shook my head. I needed to hear this. The man's laugh filled me with anger. "When do you think we can be together again?" he asked. Well, Christmas Day is definitely out, Ginny's voice said, but I'll find a way to get out of the house the next day. I'll tell Thomas my friend is sad and needs me. That always works. Hearing that made me clench my jaw. What do you want me to do if we could be together now? The man teased. Ginny's voice sounded different. If you were here now, I'd want you to be with me, she said. Then what? He asked with a smile. I want you to make my dreams come true. I could hear a shake in her voice. Oh, wow, I'm feeling so stirred up just thinking about it. Turn it off, I shouted, making Ben jump. Hearing her talk to another man in such a wild way was too much for me to handle. Ginny, the woman I loved so much, had cheated on me. If I hadn't heard that recording, I would never have believed it. Listening to it in front of my boss and his director made everything feel worse. I closed my eyes and wished I could disappear under the desk. Ben looked at me with worry. Are you okay, Thomas? Do you need anything? He asked. No, I said softly, shaking my head. I was still trying to wrap my mind around what I had just learned. Just give me a minute, I'll be fine. Then a thought hit me. My pain turned into anger. Wait a second, what were you doing? Listening in on my wife's phone? You had no right to do that. The director stepped closer, hands raised as if to calm me. It's not that simple, Thomas. I interrupted him. Yes, it is that simple. You were spying on my wife. She's a regular person who doesn't work for the government. You had no right. Thomas, we weren't spying on Ginny. Our system picked up her partner's voice pattern, which is why we grabbed the conversation. I stared at him, confused. The director brushed his hand through his gray hair. Thomas, I don't know how to tell you this, but your wife's lover is on our watch list. We think he might be connected to a terror group. I thought I had already seen the worst shock of my life. Now I realized I was wrong. Ginny might be unfaithful, but she's not dangerous. I gasped. She would never help those people. When news of the latest attack broke, she was so mad. We talked about it many times. Calm down, Thomas. No one thinks Ginny is part of any terror group. We believe that man has targeted her. At first, I felt a little relieved. It wasn't really Ginny's fault. Some shady guy was trying to charm her, but I couldn't shake the fact that she had given in to him. Why was she seeing this man? Why was she flirting with anyone but me? I thought we had a strong marriage. When did she stop loving me? I tried to set that aside and process everything else I had just learned. I don't understand. Why would a terror group target Ginny? It doesn't make sense. Ben squeezed my shoulder. Think about it, Thomas. They don't care about her. They want to use her to get to you. Me? Why would anyone want to get close to me? We're not sure, but we think they want to use Ginny to reach you and to gain information about the NSA. It's the only thing that makes sense. I sank into my chair and looked around the office, hoping that something there could make sense of this craziness. I saw a Christmas wreath hanging in Ben's window, and it felt out of place. Christmas was over, and so were many other things. I didn't believe there would ever be true peace in the world. Goodwill to men, I thought again. Ben's boss leaned over the desk and looked straight at me. Thomas, I have to ask you something important. I just stared at him, not really getting it. Can you see Ginny tonight and pretend none of this happened? Can you act like you don't know anything you just found out? I looked at him like he was out of his mind. No way, I replied firmly. He glanced at Ben. That's what I thought you'd say. I wouldn't be able to do it either if I were in your place. So here's our plan. We're going to send you out of town for a few days. This way, you won't be in danger while we figure out what's going on. What's the problem? I asked angrily. Just go pick up that guy and interrogate him. If you need someone to help, I'm willing to do it. They exchanged glances. That's the thing, Thomas. Amir has vanished, and he might have left Washington. His phone is turned off, and he's not at his apartment. A thought hit me. Even though I was nervous to ask, I needed to know. What about Ginny? Is she safe? The director said she wasn't in danger. Amir doesn't really want her. She's just a stepping stone. The FBI will keep an eye on her. I felt a bit relieved. What Ginny had done hurt me deeply, but I couldn't wish her harm. I cared too much about her. I couldn't just switch off my feelings that quickly. I looked up at the two men. So what do I do now? You need to go home and pack a bag, then hurry to Washington National. We'll send you to Oak Ridge. Your tickets are already booked, the director said. The first flight is to Nashville at noon. Someone will meet you at the airport and drive you to Oak Ridge." While I took this in, the director continued, "Make sure to leave Ginny a note so she won't worry if Amir contacts her again." When I got home to our small house and went in to pack, everything felt different. The furniture and decorations that were once warm and familiar now seemed strange to me. Our home had held so many dreams, but now those dreams were gone. As I wrote a note to Ginny, I struggled not to express my true feelings. I remembered what I'd heard about her lover, and the last thing I wanted was to give him a heads up that we were on to him. I kept my message clear and simple. I didn't do anything dramatic, like leaving my wedding ring out on the table. Instead, I took my ring off and put it in my pocket. The meaning it held was gone forever the moment I heard that recording during my long flight. I tried to keep my mind busy with the Sudoku puzzle in the magazine, but I couldn't focus. My hand kept reaching into my pocket to feel the ring resting there. I wished it were a magic ring that could take me back in time to before all this happened. But then I realized that the reasons or weaknesses that had led Ginny to be unfaithful would still be there, ready to come out again if the chance appeared. I felt so messed up that I couldn't even come up with a good daydream. As I stepped off the jet bridge at Nashville International, a big man with a noticeable bulge under his sports coat walked up to me and asked, "Are you Thomas Selfridge?" I started to reply, but then realized I didn't know this man. "Do you have any identification?" I asked. He sighed, pulled out his wallet, and showed me an FBI badge. I nodded and walked alongside him. "How did you know it was me?" I asked. "They told me to look for the saddest guy on the plane," he said, not even smiling. I felt down to think my sadness was so obvious to others. "I didn't catch your name on your badge," I said, trying to be friendly. "Henry," he said as he moved down the concourse. "Is Henry your first name or last name?" I asked, trying to keep up. "Yes," he replied, still walking. I shook my head, feeling both sad and annoyed, thinking about the long drive to Oak Ridge ahead. I checked the map at the airport before leaving and saw Oak Ridge was about 150 miles east of Nashville on I-40. That meant we had a 2-hour drive in front of us. As I expected, Henry was quiet for most of the trip. But when we passed by Harriman, he nudged me and nodded to the left. I looked over and did a double take. There, rising above the trees, were 2 huge smokestacks. Even with the winter shadows around, they stood tall enough to catch the fading light. It looked unreal, almost like something from a strange painting. "What is that?" I asked. "Kingston Steam Plant," Henry replied. "It makes a lot of electricity, mostly for your NSA guys and the Oak Ridge National Laboratory." We crossed a bridge, and now I could see the whole site. "How tall are those stacks?" I asked. "Just over 1,000 feet, he said. "Taller than the Eiffel Tower," I thought to myself. It struck me that this was the longest chat Henry and I had during the entire trip. "How do you know so much about this place?" I asked. "I grew up around here," he said, glancing at me. He suddenly left the highway and took State Route 58, driving north toward Oak Ridge. A little while later, he pulled into the parking lot of a small motel. "It's too late to visit anyone tonight," he said. "We'll stay here." He noticed my unsure look. "Don't worry, the rooms are small, but they are clean," he said. Great. I thought a rough day just got a bit worse. It was December 27th. Surprisingly, the motel turned out to be nicer than I thought. The breakfast they served the next morning was tasty. I had never tried grits before, but to my surprise, I liked them. After breakfast, we got back in the car and drove to the gates of Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Even though we were on the visitors list, the security check was very strict. The NSA's work at Oak Ridge is called the Multi-Program Research Facility, but everyone just calls it Building 5300. The people at Building 5300 mostly work on breaking codes. That means they use powerful computers to crack encrypted data until it reveals its secrets. My job is different. I analyze computer software from unknown sources and either remove it or make it safe. The team at Oak Ridge is focused on decoding, so I hadn't worked much with them before, but once they started showing me their equipment, new ideas started to come to me. In simple terms, Building 5300 is home to what could be the largest and fastest computer in the world. It's so big that it takes up the space of a warehouse, and it needs a lot of cooling so it doesn't overheat. And did I mention how fast it is? The latest version of their computer can do 1 quintillion calculations every second. Even strong 128-bit encryption can't resist that. I was excited about the idea of using that power against viruses, worms, and Trojan horses. The hackers who create these threats have their own unique styles and problem-solving methods. I thought, maybe it might be possible to figure out who made a piece of malware by looking at how they wrote the code. It's like how a language expert can tell where a piece of writing comes from based on the words and phrases used. The lead tech guy said excitedly, "All we need are enough samples to find patterns in the writing." I felt proud of that idea and promised to share it with my boss when I got back to Fort Meade. More and more businesses and governments were facing cyber attacks. This could be a way to find out who was behind the attack and where it started. Just then, I heard a grunt behind me and turned to see Henry checking his watch. He had been quietly following me all day, and now he was clearly hinting that it was time to go home. I looked at my phone and was surprised to see how late it had gotten. That evening, Henry drove me into Oak Ridge and took me to Dean's restaurant for dinner. The place wasn't fancy, it used to be a pharmacy. But the fried catfish Henry ordered was really tasty. If everything is this good, I might just become a Southerner. When I got back to my motel room, I told him he just snorted. I turned on my cell phone and saw I had a voicemail from Ginny. My sudden trip was a surprise to her, and she sounded annoyed. I hadn't told her when I'd be back. I guess I'm making it hard for her to plan her next meeting with Amir. I felt frustrated and started to delete her message, but I stopped and played it again to hear her voice more clearly. It was odd. Her voice was the same, yet it felt different because of how she had spoken with Amir. How could she sound so familiar and strange at the same time? Finally, I turned off my phone and lay back on the bed. Memories of our life together kept flashing in my mind. I suddenly remembered when Jenny came home upset because her best friend caught her husband cheating. I told her to kick him out and get a good lawyer to take everything from him. She said that if she really wanted to leave, he could file for divorce. He didn't have to cheat. But I understood Jenny's feelings. I was surprised by how strongly she reacted. But it made me feel better about my own marriage. It was clear that Jenny would never be disloyal to me. What a fool I was. I cursed myself. What a hypocrite she is. It was December 28th. After breakfast, I was set to tour the Y-12 complex. That's where they made the bomb, and it was in a different area of the reservation. I never realized how big the Oak Ridge reservation was. Henry drove me through hills and forests, and suddenly we reached a huge industrial complex that looked like a small town at building 5,300. I was with people from my own agency, and we could talk about work at Y-12. I felt like just another visitor, and it didn't take long for me to see that my guide thought I was a waste of his time. I felt the same way. I knew my boss wanted me out of the way so I wouldn't tell Jenny and Amir that we were aware of them. But surely I could be doing something more interesting than wandering around a secret nuclear weapons factory. Plus, I really disliked nuclear weapons and didn't want to be near them any more than I had to be. When noon came, I stepped over to Henry and asked if we could do something else instead of following my tired tour guide. Henry's face changed, and I think he smiled a little. We told my guide we needed to go, and then Henry took me to his car. We went to eat at a local restaurant outside the group. While we had lunch, I asked Henry if there was anything interesting to see nearby. He nodded and said there was a pretty area about 30 minutes away if we avoided the main roads. That sounded great to me. At that moment, anything would have been better. I happily agreed. After lunch, we headed west from Oak Ridge to Frozen Head State Park. Curious about the strange name, I asked Henry where it came from. He told me it was named after the main peak that often had snow on it during colder months. We traveled on an old highway until we turned north toward the little town of Petros, which is where the park entrance is located. As we reached the park, our car started to climb up a winding road that went up Fork Mountain. The speed limit was 10 miles per hour, but with the icy road and sharp turns, that felt too fast. The park was mostly filled with trees, and without leaves, the views were amazing. Henry kept pointing out the sights as we drove. Maybe that's why he didn't see the SUV that came up behind us and tried to pass. But instead of passing us, it crashed into the side of our car. "What the heck?" Henry shouted and jerked the steering wheel to the right. But the SUV stuck with us, hitting us again as our tires went off the road. Henry struggled with the wheel, and for a moment I thought he might regain control. Then everything turned upside down as our car flipped and rolled. Once everything steadied, I found myself hanging upside down, stuck by my seatbelt. I noticed some movement ahead and tried to understand what I was seeing. After a moment, I saw the SUV that hit us drive into a Jeep trail up ahead, then back up and turn around. "He's coming back!" I yelled. Henry was still angry and trying to get his big gun out. Just then, as the SUV moved toward us, another car zipped by like a crazy racer and headed straight for the SUV. I instinctively shut my eyes, bracing for a crash, but at the last second, the driver of the SUV must have changed his mind and turned away from the collision. I think he lost control because the SUV flipped and rolled down into a ditch. I couldn't see what was happening, but I could hear a loud noise as the car scraped against the rocks and then crashed into the big old trees below. The second car stopped near the spot where the SUV had fallen. Then, someone ran toward us, and to my surprise, I saw it was a woman. She wore jeans, a leather jacket, and tall boots. Her dark hair was cut short and pulled back, but I stopped looking at her when I noticed she was holding a scary-looking knife. Now she's coming after us, I thought, and I tried harder to escape. The woman ran to Henry's side of the car, knelt down, and reached through the broken window to cut his seatbelt straps. As Henry squeezed through the window, she came to my side and got ready to help me too. "Hold on to something," she said in a voice with a slight accent. "Otherwise you might fall." I gripped the car seat, but I still landed clumsily when she cut my seatbelt. She started to pull me out of the car, but then she suddenly stepped back. I looked up to see Henry's head disappearing as he climbed down the steep bank where the SUV had fallen. "No, come back!" the woman shouted, running after Henry. "Get away from there!" she yelled, trying hard to grab his attention just as she got close to the edge. I heard a strange voice yell something that sounded like, "Los Angeles!" Then there was a loud explosion, and the woman was thrown down by the blast. I quickly got out of the car and rushed to help her up. "What was that?" I asked. She looked serious. "They call it a martyr's vest. They're all using them now." I didn't understand what she meant, but then I remembered Henry. I yelled and started toward the edge, but the woman grabbed my arm. "Unless you've been in a serious fight before, you don't want to go down there. I'm sorry, but your friend is gone." She shook her head angrily. "Why don't you all tell your agents what to expect?" I still didn't understand, but when she pulled my arm, I followed her back to her car. "What do we do about Henry?" I asked as she started the engine. "I need to tell someone what happened to him." She shook her head hard. "Right now, the only thing we need to do is get out of here. They might have sent a second team." "Who sent a second team?" I asked, buckling my seatbelt. "But for us, the details won't matter now. They want to kill you, and I need to make sure that doesn't happen." I glanced back, but no one was following us. When I looked forward, I saw something red and slimy running down the windshield. The woman turned on the windshield wipers and sprayed water to clear the glass. I felt a sick feeling when I thought about Henry back there. Then I realized that the woman and Henry must have been working together. I turned to her and said, "I'm sorry about your partner." She looked at me in confusion and asked, "What partner?" I replied, "Henry, the guy who got blown up." She said, "He wasn't my partner. I'm not with the FBI." Now I was really confused. "If you're not FBI, who are you with?" I asked. She glanced at me for a moment, then focused back on the road. "I'm with the Mossad," she said quietly. I stared at her. "The Mossad is the Israeli intelligence agency. What does the Mossad want with me?" I asked, feeling scared. Her lips pressed together tightly. "Right now we're trying to save your life," she said as the car turned sharply down a hill. I sank back in my seat, trying to understand what was happening. I noticed we were leaving the park and heading back toward the highway. Now that we weren't driving through tight turns, I thought it might be safe to ask her questions. "Thank you for saving my life back there, but I don't even know your name," I said. She looked at me again and smiled a little. "I'm Esther Freeman," she said. "Nice to meet you, Thomas Selfridge." We were now back on the interstate, driving east toward Oak Ridge. I saw her set the cruise control slightly above the speed limit. The shock of what had happened was fading, but I just felt confused. Why were terrorists trying to kill me? Why was a Mossad agent protecting me? What was I supposed to do now? I looked at her with curiosity. "I guess I don't understand. Shouldn't we call the police or the FBI to tell them what happened?" She gave me a serious look. "You still don't get it, do you? Why do you think that guy was waiting for you?" I said helplessly. I don't know. Just 2 days ago, I was in Washington. Then I was ordered to come to Oak Ridge. I don't know how they knew I was here or why they want to kill me. You don't have to pretend with me, she said. I know you work for the NSA. I also know why your boss sent you here so quickly. I stiffened. You mean you know about Ginny? I asked. She nodded. We've known about her affair with Amir for a while. I've listened to your wife's conversations and many others. I grimaced. It was bad enough that my wife was unfaithful. It was worse to find out everyone else knew about it. Angrily, I said, that still doesn't explain why I was attacked like that. She took a deep breath. Didn't you find it strange that your boss would send you out of town like this? She asked. Didn't you find it odd that they wanted you to tell Ginny where you were going? They were trying to avoid having me face her. I said this angrily. She shook her head at me as if I were a slow learner. They wanted to use you to draw Amir away from Fort Meade. She said they wanted him to follow you. They didn't know what he was planning, and they wanted him far away from the NSA. They also thought if he went after you, Henry could take care of him. But Henry was careless when he drove you to Frozen Head, and it cost him his life. They were using me as bait? I asked, getting more angry at the thought. Before I could think more about it, I saw the first Oak Ridge exit zoom by. Weren't we supposed to get off there? I asked. She shook her head. That's the last place we want to go now. We need to get you back to Fort Meade. I tried to understand this. Are we catching a plane out of Knoxville? She shook her head. No planes, no credit cards, no cell phone calls. I can't risk another attempt to catch us. We're going off the grid. We're driving all the way back to Washington. I was shocked. She just nodded. We got stuck in rush hour traffic in Knoxville. I stayed quiet while Esther navigated through the mess. But once we were past it and speeding toward Virginia, I couldn't hold back my questions. You never told me why the Mossad has been following me. And why is Amir trying to hurt me? Suddenly, I had an unexpected thought. Wait, was that Amir who blew himself up with Henry? She shook her head. No, that was Amir's brother, Hassan. He was bad news, and I'm not sad he's gone. But we really want Amir alive. After all, Amir was the one involved with my wife. I wouldn't have minded if he were gone too. So who is Amir, and why does he want to harm me? She looked uncomfortable. Well, this might be partly our fault. You know that computer virus you've been working on? We sent it to the NSA. I was shocked that she knew about that. Nothing seems secret anymore. One of our people found it attached to a message we intercepted in Tel Aviv. We still don't know what it is or what it's meant to do, but we think it targets something in Israel. The only clue we have is the name of the virus, Alan Dulles. This was the first time I had heard about a name. What is Alan Dulles? I asked. Is it a code or someone's name? No, it's a name from history. Back in the 700s, the Moors invaded Europe from North Africa. Over time, they took control of Portugal, most of Spain, and even part of France. They called this area Al-Andalus, and different leaders managed it for almost 700 years. I looked at her confused. This was about something that happened 1,300 years ago. She nodded sadly. I know it sounds strange, but some groups want to bring back the caliphate and take control of Al-Andalus again. That's the wildest thing I've ever heard, I said. How can they expect to do that? It has nothing to do with me. I don't have any Spanish roots. I've never even been to Spain. You're seeing this from a Western point of view, not theirs, she replied. Losing Al-Andalus was a big blow to them, and they think they need to get it back, even if it takes a long fight. They know they need help from other Arab countries, so they plan to attack Israel. We believe the Al-Andalus virus is the first part of that plan. Our experts think this virus is a very clever cyber attack on our systems, but we couldn't solve it, so we brought it to you. Why me? I'm just a regular hacker, I argued. Don't underestimate yourself, Esther said. We've seen your work and we know what you can do. More importantly, those groups know it too, and they don't want anyone to stop this virus. Why do you think they tried to reach you through Ginny? Why do you think Amir sent his brother after you when you were suddenly using the biggest computer system around? My boss never mentioned any of this, I said, feeling frustrated. She shook her head in disappointment. The bosses at the NSA didn't think the Al-Andalus virus was important. She explained that we had to really push to get them to give it to you. Then I remembered something. Just before that guy exploded, he yelled something I didn't get. She was right there with me. Yes, he yelled Al-Andalus. Do you believe me now?" I sat back and tried to understand everything I just learned. Another question came to mind, but before I could ask it, Esther suddenly took the exit for Johnson City. "Where are you going?" I asked. Instead of answering, she pulled over on the side of the road and turned off the car. Then her head fell back against the seat. "I need to rest. I don't think I can drive any longer," she said. Then, to my shock, she fainted. I panicked a bit and shouted her name, shaking her, but she didn't wake up. I jumped out of the car, ran to her side, and opened the door. Then I noticed something wrong. The shoulder of her leather jacket had a big tear. I put my fingers inside and pulled them back out to find them covered in blood. I pulled her out of the driver's seat and managed to get her into the back seat. Now what should I do? I spotted a motel sign in the distance. Not knowing what else to do, I drove there. An old man was at the front desk. I remembered what Esther had told me, so I paid cash for a room for the night. When I got back to the car, I saw Esther sitting up in the back seat. She nodded at me when she saw the room key, and I felt a bit better. I parked the car in front of the room and carefully helped her inside and onto the bed. She gasped as she lay down, but otherwise she stayed strong. I turned on the lamp by the bed, and she looked up at me. "You'll need to help me take off this jacket," she said. I nodded and carefully helped her slide her good arm out, then took off her other arm, being gentle. She closed her eyes and took a few deep breaths. "Now we need to take off the sweater," she said. I felt nervous because the sweater was tight and wouldn't come off easily. Slowly, I pulled the torn arm of the sweater off her, and she let out a little sob as her arm came free. I gasped when I saw the cut on her upper arm. I tried hard not to stare, but it was difficult. She had a fit body with strong muscles and hardly any extra fat. I looked up to see a small smile on her lips. "A girl likes it when a guy looks at her," she said, making me blush. But then her smile disappeared and she spoke seriously. "You need to find a drugstore nearby. Get ibuprofen, some rubbing alcohol, antibiotic cream, gauze, bandages, and tape. Oh, and if they have it, get a small sewing kit." I hurried out to the car, glad to look away from Esther. There was a small shopping center about a mile down the road where I could buy everything she needed. I made sure to pay with cash. When I got back to the room, Esther was sitting up in bed. She had rinsed her arm in the bathroom, but it was still bleeding onto the towel she had. She took a couple of ibuprofen first, then let me clean her wound with the alcohol. I knew it had to hurt, but she didn't make a sound. After I did my best, she looked at me and said, "Hand me my knife." I didn't understand why she wanted it, but I found it in her pocket and gave it to her. "Okay," she said, taking a deep breath. "Now I need you to stitch up the wound." "Wait," I said. "I've never done that before. I don't know how." She looked at me seriously. "If you don't do it, I might keep bleeding and I could faint. Don't worry. I'll guide you." Reluctantly, I took the needle and threaded it, tying the end. When I was ready, she grabbed her knife, held the handle in her mouth, and bit down. I started to sew up her cut. I heard her gasping and whimpering around the knife. A few times I thought I might get sick, but seeing how brave she was made me push through until I finished. When I tied the thread, I put some antibiotic cream on the wound. She took the knife out of her mouth and looked at my simple surgery. "Not bad for a starter," she said. Then she fainted. That scared me, but her breathing seemed fine. I laid her back and used a pillow to raise her feet. I covered her with a blanket and waited. After a few minutes, her eyes fluttered open. When she saw me, she smiled a little. "Don't worry, Thomas, I'm okay now. I just feel weak. Let me rest a bit and I'll be fine." Then she closed her eyes again. Once I knew she was asleep, a wave of tiredness hit me. The attempt on her life, Henry's death, and everything I had learned drained me of energy. I got up, turned off the lights, kicked off my shoes, and put my keys and wallet on the nightstand. There was nowhere else to sleep but the floor, and I didn't think I could do that. So I slipped in next to Esther. I fell asleep the moment my head hit the pillow. It was December 29th. When I woke up, the sun was up, and I felt embarrassed to see that I had cuddled close to Esther, my arm around her waist. I gently pulled my arm away, hoping not to wake her. I didn't want her to think anything strange. She still seemed to be asleep. I put on my shoes, grabbed my wallet and keys, and went to the car to find us some food. Luckily, there was a fast food place near the drugstore I had found the night before, and I picked up a bag of breakfast sandwiches and 2 big coffees. When I returned to the motel, Esther was awake and sitting up in bed. She asked me to change the bandage on her arm. I was happy to see that the bleeding had stopped and there were no signs of infection. Then I had to help her put her sweater back on. I tried to stay calm while being so close to her, but it was hard. Thankfully, I didn't hurt or scare her. We were both very hungry, so we dug into the sandwiches. While we were sipping our coffee, she looked at me and asked, "I didn't know Ginny had a tattoo." "She doesn't," I replied. "What made you think that?" "I woke up last night and went to the bathroom. When I came back, I saw your wallet had opened to a picture of her. It looked like she had a tattoo on her neck." My sadness came back fast. "That's an old photo," I said with no feeling. "And it's not a tattoo. It's a port wine stain." Esther must have noticed my tone because she raised her eyebrows and asked, "Want to tell me about it?" Ginny and I went to the same high school. She was smart, pretty, and slim. I really liked her, but I was shy and a bit of a geek, so I never asked her out. Ginny had a port wine stain on her neck from birth. She felt very self-conscious about it, and sadly, the other kids made fun of her a lot. One day, as I walked down the hall, I saw a group of kids around her, teasing her. They called her names like Jelly because of her birthmark, and I could see she was crying. Suddenly, I was running as fast as I could, jumping in front of them. My fists were tight and my face felt hot. "Get away from her!" I shouted. "Leave her alone! She's beautiful, and you're just too stupid to see it!" Any of those guys could have beaten me up easily, but I didn't care. I was so angry. Finally, one of the girls pulled a guy's arm and said, "Come on, leave her alone!" Just like that, the group of bullies broke apart. I turned to Ginny, who was watching with red, tear-filled eyes. "Come on," I said. "Let's skip class and get out of here for a bit." I led her to the football field and we climbed into the stands. "Why did you say that, Thomas?" she asked quietly. "Why did you say I was beautiful?" "Because you are, Ginny," I replied sincerely. "Do you think your birthmark makes you ugly? I think it makes you unique and special." "But it's ugly," she said. "I see it every day in the mirror and I hate it." "That's where you're wrong," I insisted. "You look at yourself and only see the stain. I look at you and see a beautiful, special girl. You focus on the mark. I see you." She stared at me in surprise and then suddenly leaned in and kissed me on the lips. That was how our relationship began. We ended up going to college together and got married after graduation. But the truth was, Ginny never really believed she was beautiful. That mark on her neck always bothered her, and she tried to hide it with makeup or more clothes. After we graduated and she started working, she wanted to use her salary to get the port wine stain removed. I loved her just the way she was, but she was set on going to a specialist for laser treatments. The doctor told her the good news. The treatments would really help and could nearly remove the birthmark. But he had bad news too. He said it would take 8 to 10 treatments to finish the job, and she would need to wait several months between each treatment to let her skin heal. The other bad news was that the treatment cost a lot, and insurance didn't cover it. But Ginny was really excited about getting rid of her birthmark. Nothing else seemed to matter to her. She finished her treatments about a year ago, and it changed how she felt about herself. Her confidence grew, and she became more playful and friendly. She also started wearing clothes that showed more skin because she didn't have to hide her birthmark anymore. This change drew the attention of some men. I wasn't too happy about it, but Ginny loved the attention. She told me it was nice to have people look at her with admiration instead of pity. Her new confidence bothered me, but when I tried to talk to her about it, she said I was being too controlling. I was glad she was happy, so I kept my worries to myself. You can guess how that turned out for me. Esther looked at me quietly for a while, and I thought she saw me as a coward. Finally, she said, "You're an interesting man, Thomas. You're not what I expected." Then she suddenly stood up. "We need to get back on the highway. Morning is almost gone, and we have a lot of driving to do." Even though Esther said her arm felt better, she still didn't want to drive. So I took the wheel again. Soon we left Tennessee and entered Virginia, but we still had almost 8 hours to go. As we drove north on I-81, I turned to Esther. "What do you know about the Allen-Dallas virus? Why are people so worried about it?" I asked. Now, she was all serious. "Our team has been working on it since we found out about it, but we haven't made any progress. At first, we thought it was a way to steal important information, like passwords and secret files. But the problem is, it doesn't really do anything. We've tried it on different computers and it runs for a moment before shutting down, she explained. So why are you so worried? I asked. She replied, there are 3 reasons. First, we've never seen anything like it. It seems really advanced. No one would go to that much effort for something harmless. Second, we're hearing strange messages from terrorist groups. Everything we pick up suggests that something big is coming. We just don't know what or when. Finally, there's you. Me? I said, surprised. Exactly, she said. When we tracked the virus to you, it got really loud for a moment and then went quiet. Next, 2 dangerous men showed up after you, Amir and his brother. Right, I said bitterly. Exactly, she replied. When we put it all together, whatever is connected to the virus is very important to those terrorist groups. We have to figure out what it is and how to stop it. When we got back to D.C., I thought we should go straight to Fort Meade. But Esther shook her head firmly. I really don't think they will let me in there with you. They might not even let you in after what happened in Oak Ridge, she said. Instead of risking a long wait, she suggested I handle the virus from our home computer. You can access the NSA network safely, right? I told her I could. So that became our plan. The only part of working from home that worried me was the chance of running into Ginny. After everything I had learned, I didn't feel ready to talk to her. Plus, it would distract me from focusing on the virus. Talking things over with my wife would have to wait. I did my best to make up for our late start, but we kept losing time. Between stops and a break for lunch, Esther's arm was hurting her, and the ibuprofen didn't seem to help much. At last, I got off the highway in Harrisonburg and looked for a pharmacy. I went past a few chain stores and finally found a small, family-owned drugstore. The woman at the counter was very kind. When I showed her Esther's arm, she looked concerned. I'm trying to get my wife to our family doctor in D.C., I told her. But I'm not sure she can wait that long. The woman went to the shelves and came back with a small white envelope. Here's a pain pill, she said. It's a mix of acetaminophen and hydrocodone. I can't give you more than one without a prescription, but this should help your wife until you can get home. She should eat something before taking it. I thanked her many times for her help, and we got back into the car. Esther wanted to wait a bit before taking the pill in case it made her sleepy. So I drove for another hour until we reached the turnoff for I-66 and stopped in Front Royal. By then it was past 8 p.m. and we were both hungry. We found a quirky little burger place called Spelunker, maybe named after Skyline Caverns. We enjoyed some surprisingly good burgers and fries. Esther took the pain pill with her meal. It seemed to work quickly because she started to feel sleepy right after we finished. I was tired too, and it was clear we wouldn't make it home that night. There was a Super 8 motel just across the street, so after our meal, I drove us over there and got a room. I helped Esther inside, and she was asleep just minutes after lying down. That left me alone in the dark room, and my mind started to wander back over everything that had happened in just a few days. My whole life felt like it was falling apart, and the person to blame was my wife, Jenny. She was the woman I had loved deeply, someone I would have done anything for. I thought cheating was one of the worst things you could do. When you love and trust someone, only to find out they don't feel the same way, it shakes you to your core. I was filled with so many feelings that it was hard to understand them all. All I knew was that Jenny was the last person I wanted to see. Just thinking about running into her made me more upset. So I did something I shouldn't have. I went outside, took my phone, and called Jenny. Part of me hoped she wouldn't pick up. Of course, the call went to her voicemail. Hearing her voice made my anger rise quickly. It's me, Jenny, I said, trying not to shout. I know about you and Amir. I heard all the things you said you'd like to do with him while you're stuck at home with me. It makes me sick. I can't believe you cheated on me after everything I did for you. You talked a lot about being faithful. I felt my voice getting louder, so I took a deep breath to calm down. I'll be home tomorrow and I don't want to see you there. Go to Amir's place or your parents'. I don't care where you go, just stay away from our house. The only time I want to see you again is in court for our divorce. I wanted to say more, to express all the pain and anger I felt, but I couldn't find the right words, so I hung up. I wished I had an old phone with a receiver so I could slam it down. Still feeling upset, I walked east on South Street for a bit and then turned back. When I got to our room, Esther was still sleeping. I looked at her and wondered what she was really like. Did she have someone back in Israel? Did she ever cheat on him? I shook my head to clear my thoughts. At least she had saved my life. Even though she needed my help, she still put herself in danger for me. That meant something. I lay down next to her. I could feel her warmth through the blankets, and it felt nice. But then I realized I would probably be sleeping alone for a long time. With that sad thought, I drifted off to sleep. It was December 30th. The little breakfast at the motel wasn't great, but it was enough to get us going. Esther said her arm felt a lot better. When we were ready to leave, I got back in the driver's seat. I knew the way home to College Park. It took us about another hour and a half to reach Washington, and then we had to take a long drive around the Beltway. Once we reached College Park, the traffic got a lot better. With the University of Maryland students away for Christmas break, the streets were almost empty. I drove through our neighborhood carefully, and when I passed my house, I noticed Jenny's car was not in the driveway. I went around the block and parked. The inside of the house was messy, but I chose to ignore it. I didn't feel like I needed to say sorry to Esther for Jenny's untidiness. We had turned our dining room into an office, so I led Esther in there and started my computer. But just as I was about to log into the NSA network, I heard a key in the front door. Oh no, I thought. I told her not to come here. I rushed to the door and opened it suddenly. There was Ginny, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Thomas, I'm sorry," she cried. Before I could say anything, she fell into my arms. Just then, a man pushed his way inside. "What the heck?" I yelled. But then I saw the big black gun he was holding. I froze. Esther quickly ran up behind us. "Get back!" the man said, aiming his gun at all three of us. He slammed the door shut and grinned at us. "Let me introduce myself. I am Amir," he said, pointing at me. "And you must be the poor cook," he sneered. Then he saw Esther and his grin got bigger. "And who do we have here? It's the brave Esther Freeman." I noticed Esther tensing up, ready to act. Amir, that was his name, must have noticed too. He shifted his gun to aim at her. "No, no, no," he warned. "Don't even think about it. You would be dead before you could touch my gun." He opened his jacket to show the vest he was wearing underneath. "One wrong move, and I take us all down. Me to paradise, and you all to trouble." Esther relaxed while Jenny and I stood frozen in fear. "Very well, nerd boy," Amir sneered. "Let's see how much you've learned about our little surprise." He stepped into my office, looked at my computer, and moved the mouse to wake it up. The screen showed the login page for the NSA network. "The password?" he asked. "Give it to me." "No," I replied firmly. I hoped that keeping him in the dark about what we had would give us some power over him. "So the cook wants to act tough," he laughed. "I wonder what it will take to make you help me. Maybe if I hurt the lady." I saw Esther stand a bit taller, ready to face whatever might happen. But Amir laughed again. "No, she is a soldier. Here's the simplified version of the provided text. All soldiers know they might die someday. I doubt her death will change your mind." Suddenly he pointed the gun at Jenny. "How about this?" he asked, his voice cold. "Do you still care for her enough to try to save her?" Jenny shouted, "Amir, you can't mean that. Not after what we've been through." Amir's face changed, showing hate and disgust. "Be quiet. You mean nothing to me, just another Western woman ready to betray her husband." Then he turned to me with a sneaky smile. "But I don't think I'll kill her. What if I just hurt her?" Jenny started to cry, but Amir kept staring at me. I felt angry at her for what she'd done, but I still didn't want to see her suffer. After all these years of protecting her, I couldn't just forget that. Okay, I said. "Don't shoot her. I'll give you the password." "Much better," he replied, turning away from Jenny to focus on the keyboard. "What is it?" I thought I had to grab his hands. Suddenly, a wild idea hit me. If it didn't work, he might kill me right away, but if I didn't find a way to stop his virus, he would probably kill me later. "I don't have it memorized," I said. "I used the product code on that metal cube on the shelf." "You really are a nerd," he said, sneering, as he picked up the cube to look at it. The cube was small and shiny, about an inch on each side. "That's only half the password," I said, out of breath. "The other half is on the second cube over there." I pointed to a wooden cabinet behind me. I could feel his suspicion growing, along with the pressure of the gun aimed at my chest. "Pick it up and show it to me, slowly," he directed, warning me not to make any fast moves. I took the cube from the shelf and raised it for him to see. It looked just like the one in his hand. "Do you want me to bring it to you?" I asked. "No," he snapped. "Put it on the floor and slide it over to me with your foot." Carefully, I placed the cube down and nudged it toward him with my shoe. Jenny kept crying, and Esther looked at me with curiosity as I knelt. I pushed the cube toward him. "Now back up, all of you," he growled. We moved back against the wall while he kept the gun close. He knelt to grab the second cube in his right hand while still holding the first one in his left. Then he stood up to check both cubes, but to our shock, his hands suddenly crashed together with so much force that we could hear the bones in his fingers break. Amir screamed in pain and fell to his knees, desperately trying to pull his hands apart. I ran at him a bit awkwardly and bumped into him with my shoulder, making him fall to the floor. Esther was right behind me. As he fell, she kicked him hard in the head. She did it again, and Amir went limp. "Do you have any tape?" she shouted at me. I quickly opened a desk drawer and grabbed some duct tape. In no time, we had his arms taped together, his fingers stuck between the metal blocks. After Esther taped his legs, she turned to me and looked confused. "What were those blocks?" she asked. "I've never seen anything like them." I felt embarrassed. "They're just magnets," I explained. "They're really strong, special magnets. I saw them in a science catalog and bought them out of curiosity, but I was scared to use them." "Each one can pull about 140 pounds, I said. It was the only way I could think of to stop him from using that dangerous vest. "Oh my gosh, no wonder he couldn't pull his hands apart. I almost feel bad for him," she said. I wasn't really sure it would work, but I felt like I had to do something. Esther didn't say anything. She just looked at me for a long moment. Then we heard a loud bang, and the front door flew open. Several men rushed into the house with rifles. "FBI!" one of them shouted. "Everyone down on the ground! Hands up!" It took a while to explain everything. After the agents figured out who we were, they focused on Amir. First, they carefully cut off the vest he was wearing and then disabled it. One agent whistled and said, "This would have blown up the whole house if he had used it." Only then did they cut the tape off Amir and try to pull his hands apart. It took 2 agents to get his hands free, and the pain woke him up. He quickly reached for the trigger of his vest, but then he realized it was gone and he couldn't do anything. For a moment he looked defeated, but then he stared at Esther and me. "You think you have a chance? You're too late to stop what will happen. My life doesn't matter." He shouted, "Alan Dulles!" and then smiled a twisted smile. Suddenly, I heard a small crack and smelled a bitter odor. "Oh no!" one agent shouted. "He's taken poison!" The medic working on Amir yelled, "Amyl nitrite! Now! Hold it under his nose and make him breathe it!" But Amir started shaking, and within 2 minutes, he stopped breathing. "Cyanide!" the medic cursed. "He must have had a fake tooth. The last time I heard of anyone doing that was ages ago." After Amir was placed in a body bag and taken away to the ambulance, something dramatic happened next. An agent came over to Jenny and asked politely, "Are you Virginia Selfridge?" When Jenny nodded, he said, "Mrs. Selfridge, you are under arrest for being part of a murder and for causing fear." Then he began to read her rights while she gasped and protested. No, I had nothing to do with this. I had no idea he was dangerous." She cried, but the agent didn't listen and calmly put handcuffs on her. She was crying again and turned to me, her eyes full of fear. "Thomas, help me! You have to do something. Make them understand I wasn't involved in this. Amir tricked me." I have to admit, I enjoyed seeing her in trouble. "Sorry, Jenny, I can't help you. You brought this on yourself. Next time, pick a better man to spend time with." As the agent took my crying wife out the door, I asked another agent, "Are they really going to charge her as an accomplice?" He replied, "No. We know she's only guilty of being foolish, but we'll question her to find out everything about Amir, his tricks, and his connections. I don't think her new year will start off well." Feeling satisfied, I walked over to Esther. The medic was looking at her arm, which was hurt. "This will hurt for a bit," he said, "but it doesn't look infected, and it should heal fine." He then gave her a wink I wasn't supposed to see and added, "But if I were you, I'd sue the person who stitched you up. Those stitches are terrible." She turned, touched my hand, and smiled a little. "I might think about that," she said. Then her mood changed, and she stood up to find the agent in charge. When she found him, she asked for an escort to Fort Meade. Now that Amir is out of the way, we need to deal with Alan as soon as possible. We need all the help we can get. It seemed the agent had called ahead because when we reached the NSA headquarters in Fort Meade, we were treated like important guests. An armed guard took us to a secure elevator that took us directly to the top floor. From there, we went to the office of the NSA director, a place I had never seen before. Along with the director, we met high-ranking officials from the FBI and the CIA. I thought, I'm way out of my league here. Esther and I were asked to explain everything that led us to this moment. After we finished our discussion, the others shared more details and new information about what was happening. The main point was that all three agencies believed a big terror attack called Alan Dulles was going to happen soon. They thought it might take place on New Year's Eve, and that Israel could be the main target, though there could be other targets too. Everyone agreed that the computer virus we were looking into was very important to the situation. But after that, no one could agree on anything, and the group began to argue. At one point, the CIA called Eve and motioned to Esther, and the two of them left the director's office. When they came back, Esther had a strange look on her face. She leaned in and whispered, "I just had an interesting phone call. We woke up the head of Mossad. I have been told to stay with you and help in any way I can." Before I could respond, the NSA director looked at me. "Mr. Selfridge," he said, "I hear you are very good at solving problems like this. I also understand you have been working on the Allen virus for a while now. The terrorist group is worried about what you might find, so they sent two of their best agents to try to stop you. For those reasons, I want you to gather a team to break this code and stop its plan. You can ask for any resources from the NSA you need." He paused and looked at Esther. "I've also been told my colleague in Tel Aviv wants Miss Freeman to join your team. Is that right, Miss Freeman?" When Esther nodded, the director stood up. "We have a lot to do, but it's best if you both get back to working on that virus right away." He must have pressed a button because a man came through the door and showed us to a workspace on a lower floor. He pointed at the computer stations and secure phone lines and told us to make ourselves comfortable. "I'll be just outside if you need anything," he said. He explained that this was not a usual meeting room. There were many television screens on the walls, each showing a live news feed from cities around the world. Below each screen, a clock showed the local time. "Look," Esther pointed. "It's 5:30 in the afternoon on the 30th. But in Israel, New Year's Eve has already started. If the attack is set for midnight, we don't have much time." I sat down at a computer and opened up the work I had already done on the virus. The code appeared on the screen, line after line, page after page. I tried different methods to understand it, but none of my tools worked. I got lost in the work and lost track of time. Someone brought in sandwiches and I ate one without even noticing what kind it was. My eyes started to hurt, so I laid my head down for a minute to rest. On December 31st, I woke up to Esther shaking my shoulder. I looked at her, confused, and she just pointed at the clock for Tel Aviv. It said 1 p.m. on December 31st. I felt puzzled when I checked the other clocks and saw that it was only 6 a.m. here in Washington. Suddenly, I heard loud explosions coming from one of the TV screens. I looked around quickly and realized the sounds were from a broadcast of New Zealand, not Israel. They were fireworks, not bombs. I slowly understood what was happening and glanced at Esther nervously. It was midnight in Auckland. New Year's Eve had already begun there. Time was running out. I stared at my computer screen, but the code there was just as confusing as it was the night before. I thought the virus was made to attack a special operating system, but I knew there were thousands, maybe millions of those systems worldwide. The only person who could really understand the code would be someone who worked with it often. We had to try a different approach. I turned to Esther and said we might do better if we left the code alone for a bit and figured out what the bad guys wanted. If we could guess their goal, it might help us figure out how to work on the code. Let's start with the basics. Bad guys usually use viruses to steal things like account numbers or passwords. Taking important secrets could cause big problems, but I didn't see how it would help them much. Besides, from what I'd read, that kind of spying only works if the enemy doesn't know you've broken in. She nodded. Our team thinks the same way. We believe these groups want something big, like the attacks on September 11th. Okay, I said. Let's say they managed to blow up the tallest building in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. How would that help them reach their goal? I asked. If they attacked the Knesset or caused another big disaster, she replied, it would create a lot of fear in the country, but it wouldn't weaken the Israeli military. They know we would respond with everything we have. Surely those groups wouldn't want that. I agreed. Another war in the Middle East would be terrible, but none had ended well for the Arab countries. If I were them, I would aim for a big blow that could completely take Israel out of the picture. Put yourself in their position. What could do that? Esther and I tossed around ideas for a few minutes. Then I saw her face go pale. If I were the terrorists, I think I know what their target would be. Dimona? The nuclear site in the Negev desert? I asked. Exactly, she replied. She said that if they could destroy it, they could make Israel like Chernobyl. That thought scared me, but Esther seemed calm again. I can't tell you all the details, she said, but that place is protected like no other in Israel and maybe the whole world. There's no way they could even get close, let alone destroy it. Just then, the live feed from Sydney showed fireworks lighting up the famous opera house as the world got ready for a new year. I almost looked away, but then my eyes went back to the scene. The bright fireworks reminded me. The Patriots! I shouted. The virus is aimed at the Patriot missiles! I rushed to the door and saw our contact standing outside. We need someone from the company that makes the Patriot missile system, I shouted. Get them here right away. Bring them by plane if you have to. While we waited, Esther made a phone call to Tel Aviv. Most of her talk was in Hebrew, so I couldn't understand her, but it sounded tense. After she hung up, I asked her what was happening. The Israeli Defense Force thinks their system is safe. They don't believe anything is wrong with the Ya'alon. What's the problem? I asked. That's our name for the Patriot system, she explained. They think we're just seeing things. I went online to find details about the Patriot system. While scanning the links, the door opened, and a young man wearing a jacket with the Raytheon logo walked in. We make the Patriot system, he said casually. I quickly explained our theory and showed him the virus we had found. At first, he looked bored, but then his face changed as he started checking the code on his laptop. After a few minutes, he looked up, clearly worried. Oh no, he said. What is it? Esther asked. This is serious, he said, pointing at his laptop. This is the system for the Patriots and the radar tracking system. That virus you found can change the data the radar sends to the missile. It's a small change, but at the speed needed, it will make the Patriot completely miss its target. I turned to Esther. Go back to the IDF and tell them we know the virus targets the Patriots. Then get them to check the systems again for infection. I turned back to the Raytheon tech. Don't leave. We need your help. Then I called the director's office. They put me on the line right away. Sir, we have proof that the virus attacks the Patriot missile system. We're not sure, but we think the target is Israel, maybe the Dimona nuclear site. Yes, sir. Our next job is to find a way to stop it. Esther was on the phone too. When I hung up, she looked at me, clearly upset. That'll teach them to pay attention, she said. They already found signs of the Al-Andalus virus in one of the Patriot sites, and they're checking the others now. A Raytheon technician spoke up. Oh, they'll definitely find it. All the systems talk to each other. That means they all work together. If one is infected, you can be sure the others are too. Esther and I looked at each other. So how do we fix it? I asked the technician. Well, he said, I've never heard of a virus in our system, but it should be simple to fix. You just need to change out the IN and PCU in each missile battery for new ones. Can't you just install a new operating system? I asked. These systems aren't like a Mac or PC, he replied. The hardware and software are all mixed together. You have subsystems running through the whole unit and they all work as a team. The only way to be sure the system is clean is to swap it out. Okay, how long does that take? I asked. Anywhere from 8 to 12 hours, he said. That's going to be very tight, Esther said. That's not counting delivery time. The technician continued. Delivery? From where? I felt uneasy. From our plant in Andover, Massachusetts, he said. I sank back in my chair and looked at Esther with worry. That won't work, I said. I turned back to the Raytheon guy. We need to think of something else. We spent hours trying to solve the problem. I tried to explain how viruses work, and he taught me about the Patriot system, but we weren't getting anywhere. More software engineers from Raytheon came in, and I started moving around them, trying to find a way to remove or disable the virus. The problem was that their system was unique to the Patriot unit. None of their programmers had seen a virus like this before, and they didn't know how to deal with it. The simple answer for them was to swap out the units. This was not only going to take too much time, but they would have to shut down the full system while this happened, leaving it open to attack. In a way, we would be helping the virus do its job for the terror groups. One engineer got frustrated. "Look," he said, "if you're worried about a missile attack, the best plan is to destroy the missiles on the ground before they launch. Get rid of the threat first, and then you can take your time swapping out the Patriot tracking system." Esther stood up and confronted him. In Gulf War I back in 1991, the Iraqis fired Scud missiles at Israel to pull us into the war and divide the coalition. The coalition air forces sent many planes to hunt for Scud missiles, trying to find and destroy them before they could be fired. They mostly failed because the missiles were hidden on special trucks in the desert. This was more than 20 years ago when the missiles were big and heavy. Now the newest missiles are smaller and much harder to find. They are also easier to use, so stop wasting time and get back to your tasks. Yes, ma'am. He took a deep breath and turned back to his computer while I tried not to smile. The mood was serious, but I couldn't help but admire how strong Esther was. Just then, she grabbed my arm and pointed at the screen showing live footage from Tel Aviv. "It's midnight," she gasped. Everyone in the room froze, watching closely to see what would happen. Esther leaned in and whispered, "The IDF is on high alert, and I heard your military is also ready." But what we saw from Tel Aviv was just the usual New Year's Eve celebrations. Esther smiled with relief and told me that Dimona showed no signs of trouble. After that, the Raytheon team wanted to leave, but we told them they had to stay. "We have too much to lose," Esther insisted. So the group reluctantly went back to work. After a while, one of them looked up and asked, "Does anyone know what's special about 492? I gave him a confused look. "I can't think of anything. Why do you ask?" He replied, "That's the number the virus uses to change the targeting data for the missiles. It seems like a very exact number. I wondered if it means something." Another tech chimed in, 1492, I know what that stands for. To our surprise, he started singing a childhood rhyme. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Everyone laughed except for Esther, who looked troubled. She went to one of the computers and began to search quickly. "That's it!" she shouted. We all stared at her in confusion, so she explained. "Everyone knows that King Ferdinand of Spain and Queen Isabella sent Columbus on his journey in 1492. But many of us have forgotten the other big event of that year. It was also when the last Amir gave up Granada to Queen Isabella, ending Muslim rule in Spain." Her face went pale as she continued typing. "Oh my God, look at this," she gasped. "The Amir surrendered on January 2nd. The attack wasn't meant for New Year's Eve. It's planned for the day after. Terror groups want revenge for that defeat. I bet they're getting ready to attack Al-Andalus on that date." The Raytheon team looked at her like they didn't understand, but it made perfect sense to me. Esther quickly picked up the phone to call Tel Aviv, and I asked our contact to take me back up to the director's office. After I explained what we found out, he nodded slowly. "From what I know about these groups, I think you are right. They never forget old fights, and they'd love to make a big move on the day they lost before." He picked up his phone but paused to look at me. "Now you and your team need to come up with a way to stop them." When I got to our planning room, the engineers from Raytheon were gathered around one of the computers. They had set up a secure link between Fort Meade and Andover and were now online with the test version of the Patriot defense system. For the next few hours, we tried to find a way to get rid of the virus, but the people who designed the system never thought they would need to fix the Patriot software, and they didn't know how to find the parts that were harmed. "It's like a sickness," one of the techs groaned. "It spread throughout the system, and now we can't control it." On January 1st, as we worked hard, New Year's Day in Israel went on without any trouble. Esther and I were glad that her prediction was right, but it only meant we were closer to when we thought the real attack would happen. Finally, the leader of Raytheon's tech team came to me. We have gone over this many times. There are only two things we can do. The first is to shut down all the units that have been infected and completely erase their software systems, including everything connected to them. Then we'll install new software that we know is safe. After that, we'll start them up and test them. But it will take a lot of time, and even then we can't be sure the new software won't get harmed too. I shook my head and turned to Esther, feeling frustrated. We can try that, but I don't think we can finish in time before midnight in Israel. Also, we don't want to turn off all of Damona's defense system for too long. What if the attack happens early? She looked defeated, and I felt like I had let her down. I turned back to the Raytheon team. Isn't there anything else we can try? Some sort of check that would notice the problem and stop the virus? The guy looked at me with regret. When the system was made, they never thought about a virus. Now this awful problem has spread everywhere in the system, and we don't have anything to stop it or block it. I wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come as a thought from the past hit me. Smallpox, I called out when he looked at me confused. I continued, the way to fight smallpox is with cowpox, which is a weaker version of the same sickness. We might not be able to get rid of the virus, I said, getting more excited. But what if we protect the system with another virus? The group looked at me with doubt. Listen, I said, we have a virus that harms the Patriot system and makes it give wrong target data. The data is off by exactly +1, 492 degrees. What if we create a second virus just like it? Instead of that, our version would tell the Patriot to shift its aim by -1, 492 degrees. Wouldn't the two of them just cancel each other out? The software engineers started to argue among themselves, debating this idea fiercely. After 20 minutes, the team leader turned to me. Some of our team think it might work, but others are not so sure. How can we know the two viruses won't create a bigger problem? Can they really exist together? We don't even know if we can infect the Patriot system again. We don't have enough time to test it right. Listen, everyone, I said, we already know the first virus spreads easily and is probably very effective. If we make a virus that is just like the first one but with opposite values, it should work. Besides, what other choice do we have? There was more discussion, but finally the group agreed, even if reluctantly, that making an Al-Andalus antivirus was our best chance. They started working on the antivirus, checking and rechecking to make sure everything was exactly the same except for the target values. Esther took my arm and looked at me with worried eyes. Are you sure this will work? Thomas, if you're wrong. I looked back at her, feeling the same emotions I had back in high school when those bullies picked on Jenny. I believed in this and I wasn't going to step back. This is the right thing to do, I said strongly. I'm sure of it. She looked into my eyes for a moment and then said, I believe you. The next few hours flew by. Some team members checked and rechecked the new antivirus, while others got ready to send the code to the technicians on the ground in Israel. Those technicians were preparing to reinfect the Patriot systems and then test them to see if the antivirus worked. Meanwhile, as it got closer to midnight in Tel Aviv, Esther and I were in seemingly endless meetings with many people who were very doubtful about our plan. Finally, we ended up back in the director's office where, after a long and sometimes heated discussion, he looked at the others in the government and said, unless someone else can come up with a different solution in the next hour, let's stop talking and start acting. It was clear others were not happy, but they had no other options. After the meeting ended, the director came over to Esther and me and said quietly, I hope you know what you're doing, for all our sakes. I had nothing to say, so I just nodded, and he seemed to understand. He waved us to follow him. All right then, you two have come this far. You should see it through to the end. Come with me. With that, he led us to the roof of the building where a helicopter was waiting, its engines running. We got on the helicopter and it took off right away. I had never flown in one before and it felt a bit scary. But Esther seemed calm. This made me think again about how little I knew about her. After a few minutes, I looked out the window and saw the clear shape of our destination, the Pentagon. It was definitely a week filled with new experiences for me. I had never visited the Pentagon before. Soon we landed on one of the helipads and someone took us into the deeper part of the U.S. Military Command Center. An armed guard was waiting by a plane door. When we got closer, he opened it and waved us inside. The room we entered was long and rectangular. Most of it had a big oval table in the middle. The seats were placed so everyone could see a large flat screen that took up one wall. At the table were more generals, admirals, and important officials than I had ever seen. Esther and I were shown to seats along the side walls. Across the room, I spotted the director who had sent me to Oak Ridge. He quickly turned away when I looked at him. After a few minutes, the lights dimmed, and everyone focused on the big screen. At first, the only light came from 2 clocks at the bottom of the screen. One showed the time in Washington, D.C., and the other in Tel Aviv. Esther whispered nervously, "It's almost midnight in Israel." Suddenly, the screen changed to show a view of the earth from above, but I couldn't quite understand it. Then the image changed again, showing it in the usual north-south direction. I could see a line of lights outlining the edges of the ocean, along with clusters of lights from different cities. Then lines appeared on the screen marking country borders, and names popped up around the major cities. I realized I was looking down from a satellite view of the Middle East at night. Suddenly, the screen zoomed in and then zoomed in further. Now, I could only see what looked like the lights of a small town in the desert with a highway beside it. The caption read, "Dimona too close." A voice spoke, and it seemed like we were moving through the atmosphere. Now, I could see the Mediterranean Sea in the northwest corner of the screen, and a dark area further to the east. "That's the Dead Sea," Esther whispered to me, pointing at the screen. "A little further, please," the voice said. Suddenly we could see all of Israel and parts of the neighboring countries. "All right, everyone, we're nearing 0 hour," the voice said. At that moment, Esther squeezed my hand tightly. The screen might have looked like a media presentation, but her worry reminded me that there were real people down below. "Keep your eyes on the north and northeast," she whispered again. "That's where we thought the attack would come from, Syria and Iraq." I asked her, but she only nodded. The clock ticked away the seconds, and I noticed it was silent in the room. Finally, when the clock showed 20:40, I heard everyone take a deep breath. But still, nothing happened. The seconds went on, and I heard people whispering. "I told you so," someone said. Then Esther's nails dug into my hand. "Look," she said, pointing at a small orange-red arrow coming from the desert north of Israel. Then I saw another one and another. At first, each one seemed to hang in the air, but then they started to fly south. More arrows took off from the northeast. "Oh no!" someone shouted. "They actually did it! There must be over 20 of them! Probably Scuds," another voice guessed. Now the fast arrows were past Jerusalem and flying over the Dead Sea. Someone had marked Dimona with a timer, and even I could see it was the target. It felt like watching a disaster happen slowly. I didn't want to see it, but I couldn't look away. Suddenly, more flashes appeared around Dimona, and then new arrows of light shot up into the sky. Time stretched on, and the arrows kept coming. I was sure our defenses had failed. Then a big yellow light bloomed in the night sky right over Dimona, and soon the darkness filled with bright flashes that looked like glowing flowers. Esther jumped into my arms and kissed me excitedly. "You did it! You did it!" she shouted as I hugged her back. I could hear people cheering in the room. Then a voice announced, "Situation report from Dimona. 1 missile got through." Esther quickly turned, and we both focused on the screen. The missile was off course and hit south of the town. Only minor damage was reported. More cheers erupted. Suddenly I gasped for air, realizing I had been holding my breath the whole time. But before I could say anything, the display showed new missile launches. This time, the missiles were coming from inside Israel. "What's happening?" I asked in confusion. But Esther was staring at the screen with focus. "Patriots aren't our only missiles," she said. "Those are Delilah's ground-launched missiles with cluster bombs. Our radar tracked every Scud and figured out their paths. Now we're firing back." She turned to me, her face full of determination. "You didn't think we would let them attack without a response, did you?" I watched as the missiles headed north and east, but this time I realized we had no defense against the incoming danger. I finally looked away. I sat quietly in my chair watching people hugging and shaking hands around the room. Not long after, Esther was called away to take a phone call. I felt even more alone then. After a bit, a man came looking for me. "Sir, the NSA director will be here for a while." He asked me to offer you a helicopter ride to take you and Miss Freeman wherever you'd like to go. Just then, Esther came back. We followed our guide through the halls and out to the helipad. I thought she would be really happy, but she seemed a bit down when we got into the helicopter. She leaned over to the pilot and asked, "Could you take me to Dulles International Airport?" "What's going on?" I asked, surprised. "You know the saying, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth," she said with a serious face. "The missile strike you saw was the eye for an eye. Now I have to go back for the tooth for a tooth. I'm taking the first flight to Tel Aviv tonight." I felt sad hearing this. I thought she might smile, but instead she squeezed my hand and said, "I wish we could celebrate, but we don't always get to choose." The helicopter flew us the 25 miles to Dulles in no time. Then Esther was leaving. She turned to me, holding my hands. "You've surprised me in many ways, Thomas Selfridge. I will never forget you." Then she kissed me quickly and was gone before I could say anything. I felt strange on my way back to College Park. Now that everything was done, the last week felt unreal. It was like scenes from a movie flashing in my mind. The places I had been, the people I had met, the things I had done. None of it felt real. I knew part of the problem was the way my feelings had been all over the place. It was like I had been dreaming and couldn't wake up. But when I got home, I had to use the side door because a piece of wood was nailed over my broken front door. The living room looked just as messy as when I had last seen it. I guess this isn't a dream, I thought with a sigh. I found some food in the fridge and returned to the living room where I set a fallen chair upright and flopped down. Maybe it was just the after effects of everything that had happened, but I started to feel sad. I looked at the clock and saw it was almost midnight. Oh no. The Christmas break was over and I had to work tomorrow. I walked back to the bedroom and turned on the light. All around me were signs of Ginny. Photos, her clothes, the furniture she had picked. I looked at the bed and couldn't help but wonder if she and Amir had ever shared it. It was too much to think about. I grabbed a blanket and went back to the living room to try to sleep on the couch. January 2nd. The couch was not very comfy, and I woke up early. But I didn't mind because I was excited to see what the Washington Post would say about the recent attack. I didn't think the team that made the antivirus would be in the news, but still, I was curious. But when I checked the front page, there was nothing. I took the paper inside and looked through it carefully. There was still nothing. How can they keep something like this a secret, I thought. I went to work at my usual time and everything felt normal. My coworkers didn't seem to know anything was wrong. "How was your holiday?" they asked. I realized they had no idea what had happened. It was a bit disappointing. About an hour later, I was called to see Ben's boss. I walked in with a smile, expecting some praise, but instead I got a frown. He showed me a document with my name on it. "When you joined the NSA, you signed a promise to keep information secret," he said. "Talking about any codes or details linked to the US or other countries can get you into big trouble, including fines or prison time. This applies to what you saw yesterday and everything before it. Do you understand, Selfridge?" I nodded slowly, and he said, "Good. Now get back to work." I felt let down as I returned to my desk. I didn't want a medal, but it would have been nice to get some thanks. It was clear someone wanted to keep this whole issue hidden. I realized that instead of being a hero, I felt like I had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The sadness I felt the night before came back, and on top of that, I had to do something I didn't want to. I went online to look for a divorce lawyer. Things only got tougher in the following weeks. I saw a mention of the FBI, and that reminded me of Agent Henry. I did a Google search for him and found a small article buried in the Knoxville News Sentinel. It said a federal worker named John Henry had died in a car accident. He was 37 years old, and there weren't many details. This news made me sad. Henry was a good man who had tried to protect me. He deserved more than a short obituary. I tried to get more information from the FBI, but I hit a dead end. A few days later, a guy who sat next to me popped his head around the corner. "Hey, have you heard the news? Our boss's boss is getting a big promotion. During the holidays, he did something big, and now he's getting treated like a hero." I didn't say a word, but inside I was angry. All I knew was that he'd used me to deal with dangerous groups. Now he was being honored. I thought about talking to the director of the NSA about what was happening, but then there was a big uproar in Congress about Israel. The Israeli army had gone into Syria, and many people were really upset about Israel's actions. When it came out that the NSA had shared some information with Israel, people were furious. Soon after, the director stepped down, and a new leader took charge at the NSA. There was also talk about delaying Israel's order for more missile defense systems. In the end, they went ahead with the deal. To make matters worse, my attempts to divorce Ginny weren't going well. I wanted to file for divorce because we couldn't get along, but my lawyer told me that Maryland makes it harder to get a no-fault divorce. There are only certain reasons allowed, like cheating or being crazy. That was frustrating. I had reasons to divorce Ginny, but I couldn't share proof without revealing secret information which would land me in trouble. "Isn't there a way to divorce without all that?" I asked. He told me, "Well, you can get a no-fault divorce if you live apart for a year. In the meantime, I could file for a temporary separation that would let me start the process, so I did that. But it made me very irritated to wait so long to be free from her. I also didn't like the idea of having to give Ginny some money while things were being sorted out. After everything she did, it didn't feel right, but I didn't have a choice. As winter changed to spring, I only felt worse. I became more and more alone, both at work and at home. My job lost its fun and satisfaction. The one good thing I had done became a secret nobody could discuss. It was clear that the bosses were unhappy with me, and my coworkers started avoiding me outside of work. The same thing happened with my friends. All the people we hung out with were couples who liked to go out together. I felt like the odd one out, and since no one knew the real reason Ginny and I broke up, I think many believed it was my fault. This left me feeling stuck and reflecting on my life a lot. It seemed like every time I tried to do the right thing, I ended up getting punished. I just wanted to protect Ginny and look after her. I never thought she would think so highly of me for that, but it would have been nice if she had been loyal. Also, I didn't want to get mixed up in a dangerous plot. But when it happened, I felt I handled it well. I didn't need a medal, but a little recognition would have felt good. More and more, I started to feel used. Ginny had definitely used me. She only wanted my support while she got her skin treatments. Well, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration. I think she really loved me at one time, but that went away quickly. Once her birthmark was gone, other men started to notice her. The same thing happened with my job. After my boss humiliated me by telling me that Ginny was cheating, he used me as bait to catch terrorists. And now he was the one being praised. Did Nestor use me too? She just wanted my help with the Al-Andalus puzzle. Once she got what she needed, she hopped on a plane and left without saying goodbye. I never heard from her since. I knew that wasn't completely fair. After all, Esther had saved my life and risked her own to do it. But she wouldn't have helped me if she didn't think I could help her back. In the end, I was tired of being used, tired of being in a marriage with a cheating wife, tired of having a job where I wasn't valued. I felt a strong desire to leave, to escape everything and start fresh, somewhere far away, somewhere no one had any claim on me. Once I got there, I promised myself I would put my needs first for a change. I had spent too much of my life doing things for others. Now it was my turn to focus on myself. The old me would have been shocked and said, "Don't act too quickly." I would have told myself, "You have responsibilities to others." Well, forget that. Those few times I made a big quick decision, things turned out okay, even if no one else knew. Now I was ready to make another important choice that felt right for me. If anyone else didn't like it, tough luck. December 31st. The next year, cheers rang out from the people at the bar as we watched the fireworks light up the Auckland Harbor Bridge. I smiled to myself. It looked just like the display I had seen in the war room at the NSA a year ago. I had a lot to celebrate. I had left everything behind except my computer, a few personal things, and a bag of clothes. I bought a one-way ticket to Auckland, New Zealand. I chose Auckland for 3 reasons. It was as far away as I could go while still speaking English. I didn't know anyone there and had no commitments. And yes, I have to admit it, I was blown away by the beautiful scenery in the Lord of the Rings movies. Once again, I realized I had made a really good choice. I found out that people in New Zealand were very friendly and nice, so I didn't feel as lonely as I thought I would. I also got a job pretty quickly. I had enough money to help me until I found work. But I got lucky and found a good job almost right away. The bank I worked for had a problem with computer security just before I arrived. My experience with computers made me a good fit for them. After I started working, I rented a small 2-bedroom apartment and began to feel more like a Kiwi. Leaving my old life behind was a big choice. It took a lot of effort to tie up loose ends in Maryland. It's not easy to leave your old life, but I managed. After I quit my job, set up my savings plan, paid my bills, and sorted out what I could, I gave my lawyer power of attorney. He would deal with my biggest worry, Jenny. I decided she could have the house instead of alimony, and I left it to him to handle everything else. The issue was that Jenny didn't want to accept the divorce. She didn't help with the process and tried to slow everything down. I told my lawyer not to tell Jenny where I was or how to contact me, but that only made her go after him, and he started charging me for all the time he spent talking to her. Eventually, I knew I would have to talk to her, whether I liked it or not. So, I set up a Skype call with her, but she didn't know about it. I had to wake up very early to have the call, which didn't help my mood at all. New Zealand is far from everyone else on the internet. It's at the end of the big cables that connect the world. Because of this, the internet isn't always great, but we got lucky. When we finally connected, our call worked perfectly. When her face appeared on my screen, I was shocked. She still looked beautiful, and seeing her reminded me of the woman I had fallen in love with. I knew this wouldn't be easy. The call didn't start well. She wanted to know where I was, and when I didn't tell her, she went from angry to crying. "Why did you run away?" she asked through tears. "Why won't you tell me where you are?" I sighed. "Honestly, Jenny, you broke my heart, and I couldn't stand being around the memories of you, so I had to get as far from you as I could." To my surprise, she smiled. "So, you still have feelings for me?" she said happily. "Why don't you stop this and come back to me?" she suggested. I tried my best not to sound sarcastic. "Jenny, you cheated on me. You broke our promise to each other, and you were with another man. How can I come back to you after that?" Her face became sad, but then she looked determined. "I know, Thomas. I feel really bad about it." "But I was in a weak spot. Why?" I asked. "Why were you weak?" She shook her head as if I should understand. "Well, I just had my last laser treatment, and I was still getting used to how I looked when he came. He told me I was beautiful. Of course, that got to me." "But I told you that you were beautiful," I said. "I have always thought so since the first day I saw you." "Yes, but you said that before I had my birthmark removed. He didn't know me before, so his kind words meant more to me," she said with a smile. I didn't know how to reply, but the look on my face must have showed my feelings because her tone changed and her face became sad again. "I don't want to talk about that. I've been so lonely without you," she said, wiping her eyes. "Every day I have cried. I know I did something awful, and I can't tell you how many times I've been angry at myself for being so foolish." She stopped to dry her eyes and continued, "But it wasn't really all my fault. I had no idea that Amir was a kind of spy trained to charm people. To me, he was just a handsome guy who said nice things. I got carried away without even realizing it. And the worst part is, he didn't really care about me. He was just using me to learn about you." She blew her nose and added, "I guess that's why he always wanted to come to our house." I felt calmer, but hearing that made me angry again. Before I could say anything, she rushed on. "I've learned so much about myself through all this, Thomas. I know I would be a better wife if you would just come back. Can you find it in your heart to forgive me? It would make me so happy. Everything could go back to how it was. What do you think?" I had been watching her talk. She looked just how I remembered, and her voice was the same, but now something was different. Then I understood what it was. I didn't love her anymore. "Jenny, I've been listening to everything you've said," I told her. "In all this time, there are two things I haven't heard. You've told me very clearly what you want and how you feel, but you haven't said anything about me and how I feel." "Well, of course I care about how you feel," she interrupted. "I know you were hurt and upset, and you had every right to be. But if we get back together, I will spend all my time making it up to you." I raised my hand, and she finally saw that I wasn't done when she stopped talking. I continued. "There was something else I didn't hear, too. I heard you say many things, but you never said, 'I love you.'" She gasped and quickly replied, "Of course I love you. That's just how it is. I've always loved you." But I interrupted her. "No, Jenny. Love is not just a given. It's not only words. It's something you show through your actions. It's not just what you do. It's also what you don't do. You don't show love by being with someone else just because he sweet talks you. I'm sorry, Jenny, but this call made me sure we can't be together again. Goodbye, Jenny. I hung up, leaving her tear-streaked face on the screen. It still hurt to lose someone who had mattered so much to me at one time. But after what I heard, I knew I had made the right choice. It was December 31st. 2 years later, I had been at a party with friends earlier in the evening, but it felt right to spend the New Year's Eve countdown at a bar. I went back to the first bar I found in New Zealand, the one that looked over Auckland Harbor. The people there had welcomed me back then, and I felt welcome again as I raised a glass and watched the fireworks. The last 2 years had treated me well. Jenny had finally accepted reality and agreed to the divorce. I gave her the house instead of extra money, and I was now a free man. My job was also going great. After working with the bank for a year, I built a name for myself as a cybersecurity expert and started consulting on my own. Luck was on my side when the National Cybersecurity Center in Wellington asked for my help. This gave me a boost, and my business started to grow. It also helped my permanent residency application, so now I was officially a Kiwi. Thanks to the money I made from my consulting business, I was able to buy a nice home with a view of Auckland Harbor. Overall, I'm glad I made that big move. They dimmed the lights in the bar for the fireworks, so at first I didn't recognize the woman behind me. But when she said, "Happy New Year, Thomas Selfridge," her voice was one I had thought about often these last 3 years. I turned and hugged her right away. "Happy New Year to you too, Esther." After a moment, we pulled apart and I looked at her. She was still fit, wearing a sleeveless black sweater and tight jeans. I even noticed the thin scar on her right shoulder. This time, her dark hair was tucked under a baseball cap with the brim pulled low. When she raised her head to watch the big fireworks over the harbor, I saw the black patch covering her right eye. The noise from the bar was getting louder, so I leaned closer to Esther and spoke in her ear. "Do you want to go somewhere quiet to talk?" She smiled and replied, "I would like that very much." We got into my car, and I drove her away from downtown to my place in Herne Bay. When we reached my house, she whistled softly and said, "You must be doing well, Thomas. I'm happy for you." I poured us both a drink and let her out onto the deck. From there, we could see a different part of the harbor and the fireworks lighting up the sky in the distance. The warm air felt nice, even with the gentle sea breeze. It still felt strange to celebrate New Year in summer after 3 years. A few minutes later, she took off her cap and asked, "Aren't you going to ask me about my eye?" When she took off her cap, I saw a scar running diagonally from below the patch up through her eyebrow. It was a white line on her olive skin. "What happened?" I asked. She put her cap back on and sat down on one of my deck chairs. "It was my fault," she said. "After I got back to Israel, I found a leader behind the attack on Alan Dulles, but I missed the knife he hid. It was too late." She gave me a cheeky grin, "But I can promise you he won't be a threat again." I remembered how she had endured my awkward attempt to stitch her arm, and I could believe she could handle a wound like the one on her eye and still fight back. "Couldn't the doctors help?" I asked, pointing at her patch. She shook her head. "The wound was too bad. Plus, it was 18 hours before I could get back to my team and be flown to the hospital. By then." She shrugged. I thought it best to change the topic. "Are you still with Mossad?" I asked. The look on her face told me I had asked the wrong question. "They kicked me out," she said bitterly. "With this face, I can't go undercover anymore. And since I'm right-handed, my shooting skill is gone too. They offered me a desk job, but I didn't want that." She went quiet, and I could feel her sadness. After a moment, she looked up at me again. "The last 3 years were hard. I had a boyfriend in Tel Aviv, and we spoke about having a future after I left the service. But when I went home to heal from my injury, he couldn't handle it. He never said anything, but he wouldn't look at my face. I guess he wasn't the man I thought he was." I could see that she was trying to downplay what had happened, but her face showed her pain. I pulled up a chair next to hers and wrapped my arm around her shoulder. We sat quietly for a long time, gazing at the city and the harbor below us. Finally, I asked what had been on my mind. How did you find me here in New Zealand? She smiled slightly. I contacted some old friends and tracked you down. I smiled back, remembering how I had tried to escape my old life. I just wanted to be far away from it all. But now, I have a new life here. This is home. I looked at her closely. But why did you come to find me? Her face grew serious. You surprised me, Thomas. When I first met you, I thought you were just a smart nerd, but I found out there was so much more to you. I saw you face danger and handle tough situations that would scare most people. I regretted leaving without knowing more about you. She paused and stared into the darkness. The time we had together, as wild and risky as it was better than any time since then. She turned to look at me. I missed it. I missed being with you. Suddenly, her expression changed. Plus, she said softly, we still have things to finish. We never got to celebrate. In an unexpected moment, she pulled my face toward hers and kissed me passionately, making it hard to breathe. I stood up and held her tightly, and we clung to each other like we were in a storm. After a moment, I brought her inside to my bedroom. We were both breathing heavily, feeling a strong connection. It took us a few tries to calm down and reconnect. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the windows, shining a reddish light in my room. I felt Esther curled up next to me and smiled, remembering our night together. I carefully sat up, trying not to wake her. I noticed that her eye patch had slipped off during the night, so I picked it up out of curiosity. Just then, she woke up. When she saw what I had, she shouted, "Give it back!" She sat up quickly and grabbed the black band from my hand. "Don't look at me!" she pleaded as she turned away and struggled to put the patch back over her damaged eye. Once she had it back on, she bent forward and began to cry, covering her face with her hands. I put my arm around her, letting her tears flow. I felt emotions surface that I hadn't felt in a long time. I remembered how she had saved my life once, and now I wanted to save hers. What surprised me most was that I knew this was what I really wanted. Not just for her, but for me too. I gently turned her to face me and carefully moved her hands away from her face. Then I reached up and lifted her eye patch off again. "No," I said softly. She made a sad sound. "I'm so ugly." "You're wrong," I said softly. "You look at your face and all you can see is your eye. But I see a strong and beautiful woman when I look at you." "You see the scar? I see all of you." She looked at me with worry, but that changed to surprise and hope. Then she hugged me tightly and kissed me. In that moment, I knew I had made a really good choice. Hey listeners, if you enjoyed watching this video and want to stay updated with our latest content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss out on what's coming next. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video with Queen Cheating Tales.